Hungary, once a steadfast pillar of the European Union, and a country that welcomed integration with open arms, is now taking a dramatic and unexpected turn eastward, toward Moscow and Beijing, entering a geopolitical orbit far removed from the liberal democratic ideals that have long defined the EU. This new direction is shaped not by shared democratic values, but by strategic pragmatism and a bold assertion of national sovereignty. For many years, Hungary was heralded as one of the EU's brightest success stories, a nation that transitioned from the uncertainty of the post-Soviet era into a stable democracy, flourishing with the help of EU funding, open markets, and political stability. That story is rapidly changing. Hungary is no longer passively drifting away from Brussels. It is actively, deliberately choosing a path that directly challenges the core principles and cohesion of European unity. This shift has ignited urgent questions among leaders in Berlin, Paris, and Brussels. Why would Hungary jeopardize everything it has gained? Their voice in the EU, privileged access to the West, and their role in NATO, by aligning more closely with authoritarian-leaning powers? What drives this remarkable pivot? And what could it mean not just for Hungary, but for the future of Europe as a whole? At the heart of this transformation is Hungary's evolving political vision under Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Since his return to power in 2010, Orbán has steadily reshaped Hungary's national trajectory, recasting it not as a liberal democracy tied to Western Europe's ideals, but as a sovereign state charting its own course based on uniquely Hungarian values, goals, and perspectives. Over the years, his rhetoric has grown increasingly sharp and confrontational. What began as subtle defiance of EU norms has morphed into an outright rejection of Brussels' ideological influence. The tension at the core of this realignment stems from a fundamental clash of values. While the European Union positions itself as the defender of liberal democracy, upholding human rights, press freedom, judicial independence, and anti-corruption measures, Budapest increasingly views these standards as unwelcome interference. Orbán frames the EU not as a partner but as an ideological enforcer, painting Hungary's resistance as a defense of national identity, cultural integrity, and traditional Christian values against what he describes as a homogenizing secular elite in Brussels. This message resonates deeply with many Hungarians. Whereas a decade ago support for EU membership soared above 80%, today it has fallen below 50%. An increasing number of citizens perceive Brussels not as a benefactor, but as a distant, out-of-touch bureaucracy indifferent to Hungary's concerns. This growing distrust has created an opening for Hungary to seek economic partnerships and strategic alliances beyond the EU, searching for validation and consequently, Hungary's gaze has shifted eastward, to Moscow, where promises of stable energy supplies are coupled with shared skepticism toward Western liberalism, and to Beijing, where enormous infrastructure investments and a doctrine of non-interference offer an attractive alternative to the conditional aid provided by the EU. Hungary made headlines as the first EU member to join China's Belt and Road Initiative, signaling a readiness to embrace China's expansive vision for global development. Bilateral trade agreements with Russia and China have multiplied, weaving tighter economic ties that could fundamentally reshape Hungary's geopolitical loyalties over time. Yet these moves come with significant consequences. The deeper Hungary integrates with authoritarian-leaning powers, the more strained its relationships with fellow EU members become. Hungary has wielded its veto power multiple times to block EU collective decisions, most notably in opposing sanctions on Russia and blocking military aid to Ukraine. The rationale remains consistent. Hungary must prioritize its national interests, even if it means standing alone. Energy dependence, in particular, has become a flashpoint. Despite broad EU sanctions and a collective determination to isolate the Kremlin in response to its invasion of Ukraine, Hungary remains heavily reliant on Russian gas, with approximately 85% of its energy supplied through Russian pipelines. Orbán insists this is a matter of survival rather than ideology. He argues that without assured energy security, Hungary cannot function, let alone prosper. However, this stance starkly clashes with the positions of Hungary's EU and NATO allies, many of whom see continued ties with Moscow as undermining Europe's unified stance against aggression. What is unfolding is not a series of isolated policy decisions, but a sweeping strategic shift. Hungary is no longer content to be the obedient student of Brussels, or a fervent disciple of Western liberal democracy. Instead, it is positioning itself as an independent actor in an increasingly multipolar world, capable of selecting its own allies and defining its own future on its own terms. Hungary is sending a clear message. Its destiny lies not in following the EU's path, but in forging a unique route, no matter how controversial or fraught with risk that path might be. This evolving stance is drawing Hungary closer to BRICS, the bloc of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which has matured from a loose association of emerging economies into a formidable strategic force offering an alternative to the G7-dominated global order. In 2022, BRICS surpassed the G7 in terms of global GDP share, underscoring the shifting balance of global power. Hungary's interest in BRICS is deliberate and calculated. It seeks to diversify its international partnerships, tap into rapidly growing markets, and secure a voice at a global table where Western values are no longer gatekeepers to opportunity. Yet every step Hungary takes in this direction threatens to unravel decades of European integration. The EU, a project founded on unity, consensus, and shared destiny, now confronts a member state increasingly unwilling to abide by its rules and values. Hungary's trajectory is not just about foreign policy realignment. It signifies a profound challenge to the EU's cohesion, and to the very idea of European solidarity. The implications stretch far beyond Brussels' walls, raising fundamental questions about the future of the continent's political and economic order, the resilience of democratic values, and the shape of Europe in a world that is itself rapidly changing. They challenge the very core, the ideological foundation that has long underpinned the European Union, shaking it to its roots. Viktor Orbán's Hungary is no longer just a marginal outlier or a rebellious anomaly within the EU framework. Instead, it has evolved into something far more significant. A litmus test, a glaring stress fracture exposing the raw tension that surfaces when fiercely guarded national sovereignty clashes head-on with the complex machinery of supranational governance. This collision creates a delicate, nearly precarious balancing act, one that Hungary performs every day. Economically tethered to the East, especially Russia and China, politically enmeshed in Western institutions like the EU and NATO, and ideologically torn between contrasting visions of governance, Hungary stands at a critical crossroads. It must thread an impossibly thin needle, walking a diplomatic tightrope, desperately attempting to hold on to its European Union membership, while simultaneously deepening strategic and economic ties with powers that frequently oppose Western interests and values. Every handshake extended toward Moscow, every memorandum inked with Beijing, every veto wielded in Brussels tightens the fragile web binding Hungary to the European project, threatening to unravel the very fabric of unity. This is no longer just Hungary's story. It has become Europe's story, a microcosm of the existential questions haunting the continent about identity, cohesion, and the future of the European project. It's a narrative that transcends borders and politics, about whether the European Union can endure as a cohesive political and economic bloc in an increasingly fragmented, volatile, and multipolar world. It's about shifting global power centers, about the erosion of Western dominance, about the rise of new challengers and alternatives. It's a story riddled with risk and uncertainty, exploring how far a single nation can redefine itself before reaching an irreversible tipping point. Hungary has stopped following. It now leads, but not toward unity or consensus. Instead, it leads toward disruption and division. In an age marked by seismic geopolitical realignments, and the decay of democratic norms, Hungary has morphed into something wholly unexpected. A wild card, unbound by past loyalties and old alliances, forging its own path with unapologetic boldness. Whether this audacious gamble will yield greater independence or result in deeper isolation remains unknown. What is certain, however, is that Hungary is not retreating, not backtracking. To the leadership in Brussels and Washington, Hungary's explanations hold no water. Its actions are not accidental bureaucratic hiccups, but calculated acts of defiance. A quiet but unmistakable nod toward Moscow combined with a thunderous rejection of European unity. Trust shattered almost overnight. What should have been a routine agreement ground to a halt under the weight of Budapest's veto, freezing vital aid and sending an unambiguous signal. Hungary no longer sees itself bound to the collective strategic cadence of the European Union. The repercussions were swift and severe. EU partners began to question Hungary's commitment not only to shared goals, but to the very principles that underpin the alliance. NATO felt the ripple effects as well, as Hungary's stance sparked anxiety about its dedication to collective defense, the cornerstone of transatlantic security. Then came yet another jolt. Hungary blocked Sweden's NATO accession, citing vague and widely disputed national security concerns. The real issue was more transparent. Sweden's vocal criticism of Hungary's backsliding on democracy had provoked a political backlash. Budapest seized the opportunity not to address genuine security threats, but to wield leverage, sending a blunt, unmistakable message cloaked in diplomatic language. Hungary was stepping out of line, deliberately and strategically, choosing to chart its own course regardless of external pressures, refusing lectures, defying conformity. As Hungary distances itself from the West, it is moving eastward with remarkable speed and decisiveness. It stands as the only EU member fully embracing China's Belt and Road Initiative. The material payoffs are tangible. A torrent of Chinese investment exceeding $1 billion in a single year has flooded Hungary's infrastructure sectors. Railways, energy grids, universities. On the surface, this paints a promising picture. Gleaming new infrastructure, jobs created, technology transferred. Yet beneath this glossy facade, a darker anxiety festers. With every yuan that flows in, Beijing's political gravity expands. What appears as economic development today risks becoming political dependency tomorrow. In a region still scarred by memories of foreign domination and control, this growing reliance triggers a quiet but persistent unease. How much sovereignty is Hungary truly willing to exchange for short-term economic? This is not aimless drift. It is a deliberate, strategic realignment. Hungary's approach is not limited to cozying up to China. It is simultaneously tightening its bonds with Russia, aligning with the BRICS bloc, and engaging with international institutions that exist outside the Western orbit. This is not passive ambivalence or accidental ambivalence. It is a purposeful pivot away from the post-Cold War global order. Hungary perceives a world no longer dominated by Washington, Brussels, or London, but one rapidly tilting toward a multipolar reality, where new alliances and power centers hold sway. BRICS, once a marginal economic curiosity, is evolving into a formidable political counterweight. Hungary seems ready, eager even to join this historic shift, seeking a coveted seat at this emerging global table, even if that means abandoning the old one entirely. This transformation has not gone unnoticed. Capitals across Europe, in Warsaw, Rome, Bratislava, are watching Budapest closely. Could Hungary's bold model become a blueprint? Can a member state defy Brussels, realign its alliances, and not only survive but thrive? For a rising chorus of nationalist and Eurosceptic voices across the continent, Hungary is no longer a pariah. It has become a prototype. What was once considered fringe or extreme behavior now flirts dangerously close to becoming the new normal. The long-held assumption that a cohesive, unified European Union is permanent is now under threat. Not from external enemies, but from within, as member states increasingly prioritize sovereignty over solidarity. Viktor Orbán does not hide his ambitions or his intentions. He has made his position abundantly clear. Hungary will not submit to EU sanctions, will not bend to the moral outrage of Western leaders, and will not succumb to pressure to realign. His vision is unapologetically sovereign, fervently nationalist, and defiantly opposed to what he terms the liberal hegemony of Western elites. His policies on energy, defense, and diplomacy are not mere pragmatism. They are ideological declarations. For now, much of the Hungarian public stands firmly behind him, seemingly endorsing this trajectory. Yet the risks mount with each step. The deeper Hungary plunges into the orbits of China and Russia, the more vulnerable it becomes to geopolitical tempests. Should tensions between East and West escalate into open confrontation, Hungary risks being stranded, too distant from the West to be trusted, too marginal in the East to be fully protected. Economic ties that once promised prosperity risk becoming shackles. Dependence on Russian energy supplies and Chinese capital investments may soon restrict Hungary's freedom of action. At this critical inflection point, Hungary teeters precariously on the razor's edge between strategic independence and diplomatic isolation. The decisions it makes now will ripple far beyond its borders, with the potential to redraw Europe's political map in profound, lasting ways. If Hungary can successfully navigate the divide between East and West, it could evolve into a new kind of geopolitical hinge, a vital connector bridging rival powers. But one miscalculation risks consigning it to isolation. A lonely outlier caught helplessly between giants in a world growing colder, more fractured, and more hostile. What Hungary is undertaking transcends a mere policy shift. It constitutes a fundamental rejection of the post-Cold War global order, and a daring wager on a radically different future.